It's real coffee-like. It's real coffee-like. All right. Hello. We are reading. All right. Welcome. It's not. Damn.
Oh, it's not plugged in. Oh, I got you. Oh, damn. No, it's not plugged in. Oh, damn. That's ageism.
How it sound? Am I plugged in all the way? What's the volume? Like Terry be having the volume at like 6. Okay, I can hear myself. Yep.
Yes, sir.
Group discussion. A little bit later this time. I apologize. Real fluid. Be water. We're on day 8 of our ongoing teaching. Day 8, book 8. We are reading The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein. And I had never read this before, but it's really interesting book. It's very different. It starts off our week about racial injustice. What are your thoughts just about this upcoming week of books on the topic of racial injustice, and what are your thoughts on how the week started with this book?
So with any of the things that we're going to be learning about this month, I was really just excited to take in all of the education and the background and the history that I possibly could during this time period, because I mean, any little bit helps. To know what you're talking about is incredibly helpful, obviously, to sit and, argue that systems are racist, or that certain entities or organizations are racist or were made to be oppressive. It just helps to have that information to back that up. And I was particularly interested in the racial injustice segment because we knew that during the different portions of... We on? Can we hear?
Yeah, we can.
Okay. We knew that the...
In the bag?
All right. We knew that the different parts of the justice system were all going to disproportionately give a disadvantage to people of color. So reading through that, you're expecting to learn about the different parts of the judicial system. You're expected to learn about policing. The theme was police terrorism and mass incarceration. So you're expecting to learn about the different aspects of the jail and of police. And it's gonna. Okay. Okay, we're back. We're good. All right. So, we were expecting to learn the different things about how policing works and how jail works and how, court works and different things like that. But I feel like racial injustice is more...
All right, we back.
I don't think
we ever left.
I don't know if the pause is. I don't know.
Definitely paused it.
You think so? You done it before?
Yeah.
And it's paused?
Yeah. How can we keep going?
Okay.
It's a dangerous game to play.
I don't know. Okay.
You did it the other day. I learned. Well, I knew for sure it worked because I watched you do it. Remember that day you went to? You was like, "I'm gonna stop real quick," and he was like, "Wait, no, I'm not gonna stop you." And then you like paused it. You was like, oh, is this gonna work? And then you like did something. Shit.
Oh no! Damn! Why would you say that?
What, that your nose was running?
We still alive.
It happening.
Delete it. Delete
No,
this
it
right there
just
from the
happened
footage.
again this morning.
No, it didn't. Not as bad. Not as
Okay. Redirect.
Okay. Yeah.
So when we went for the first week, it was kind of expected what information we would be taking in, and sort of the general idea of what it is that we were going to be talking about. So, like I was saying, that we figured we were going to learn about policing and courts and the judicial system and jail and, all the intricacies of that. But I feel like with this week, I have to open my mind a little bit more to take in now all the different ways that society as a whole can be racially unjust. So we're not just talking about police and judges and, crime and everything like that. We're going to be talking about all of the different ways that people are oppressed, or all the different ways that people of color are depressed, or all the different ways that black people are discriminated against. And so that's such a wide range of things, from housing loans to jobs without even having a felon status. That's just jobs in general discriminate. Businesses discriminating. So that's such a wide range of things that I kind of had to open my mind up a little bit more to get, to understand that there's going to be a full spectrum of ways that we're going to be discussing, all of the ways that the society as a whole can be racially unjust. That was it. That was my whole...
I was really interested in this book because you've talked about it a little bit in your conversations. Was definitely a book that I was had on the list of books to be excited for, and it lived up to expectation. Hey, like, how you doing? No, not today.
If you do it, we gonna hold it on to it for you. Okay. You know it.
Oh, what that? But I was excited going into the book. I was excited and to read it and to go through it. We've gotten through a good amount of it already. I think we have 2 more chapters left. 2 more chapters plus the epilogue, maybe the acknowledgments. And I was able to think about things like. Through I was reading it about they called them black ghettos and the slums. All I could think about was just how Pastor Shelby's talks at the city council, just how they came and how he was talking about containment and confinement. And at the time, I don't think I was really in a position to fully understand them. And even now, I don't think I'm in a position to fully understand them, but to read this book and to gain more understanding and more knowledge about it. It was something that really stuck out to me. So I was really interested in that. Then I was interested in the different type of experiences that he talks about, some of the different type of experiences that some of these African American families had. And it was really a lot of the situations and some of the chapters. The last chapter I read, it was frustrating. It was a frustrating read because there were a lot of affluent African Americans would move into a white middle class neighborhood, and that's gonna fly away. That's gonna fly away. Oh, yeah. You had dropped some though. Yeah. But some some affluent African Americans would move into these uh, all white neighborhoods and the all white cities, and they would be met with riots and riots and bombs and people throwing rocks at their house and burning crosses. And these are all type of things that you hear about, or not you hear about, but you kind of know of, and you see it sometimes. But to be able to read it, in the stories, and to be able to have pictures. Yeah, another book that had pictures in it, which I thought was, which always adds a different type of level to it. Always adds a different type of emotion to it when you can see the people. There was one incident where it happened in. It also made me think about how not so long ago this all is. It also made me think about how a lot of these incidences were happening in the early 20s, but they're also happening later in the 50s. And there was one incident I read that happened in 85. Happened in 85.
What city it was?
I think it was. I can't remember. I don't think it was Cicero. Is that how you say it? I was saying Cicero when I read it. That's how you say it. I think it might have been that one, but I'm not exactly sure. So a lot of these stories, they were frustrating reads, and on a lot of these situations, and it talked about the police and some of these families that would move into white neighborhoods, they would call for the police to protect them, and because they felt like that it had no type of other option. And it reminded me of the Capitol, the insurrection at the Capitol. He said there was at one of the situations, there was over 4,000 people, and the police just opened up the door pretty much. And it reminded me of the scenes at the Capitol where you see the cops removing the gates and inviting people in, and that made me think that a lot of these same officers at night, they're putting on hoods, they're burning those crosses, they're throwing those rocks out there. And so it didn't make any sense, or it made sense to me that the police didn't take no type of action toward these riots, or towards these. They didn't make any effort to protect these African American families. I know you didn't read too much of it, but what are your thoughts of it? What were your thoughts of it before this? And how did you come into reading this book?
Well, I came into reading the book. Angela Fellers, county board person. Is that how it is? County board person, or county board member. County board member Angela Fellers. Early in 2020, early on in some of the protests and demonstrations, she gave me this book and the book The Warmth of Other Suns. The Warmth of Other Suns is a much bigger read, and it was more story based. The whole narrative is more written around stories and trying to explain to you the same type of thing, though. We're talking about neighborhoods and these black people migrating from the south to the east and the west, and hopes of better lives, and being struck by the reality that it was different but not necessarily better. And so those were the two books I got at the same time. And I started reading The Color of Law first, and I think maybe 3 pages into The Color of Law, I realized that I was about to read something that was going to completely change my vantage point of these issues and my perception of these issues. And sure enough, it did. In the portion that you just read, not just read, but one of the portions you read earlier today, they spoke about the Cabrini Green housing projects being built in Chicago. Multiples of the housing projects that they talk about being built in there, they stood until like the 90s, the 90s, 2000s. Cabrini Green, I think, stood until the 2000s. I think, almost 100% sure. But it reminded me of how, to me, and the number one thing that I get out of this book that I translate into other books is how these systems these systems that they were putting in place for people's neighborhoods and their living and things like that, they're still very real to this day. A lot of the things that were set in place there were things that we haven't had a chance to generationally break. We haven't had the chance to break some of these cycles. It was there's been specific moments in my opinion, in the history of this country where, the manner in which it was going to go shifted and changed. And initially after slavery, that was one of the things that happened. The country could have tried to truly make amends for what was happening and truly try to make some type of equity and truly try to get to a place of understanding that, they weren't going to be able to just get rid of all the black people. So the best thing to do would have been to try to enfranchise them and bring them more part of society instead of marginalizing them. And for a little bit, that is sort of what was happening in Reconstruction. But then there was a strong backlash, and that lasted until about the 20s, 30s, where we're getting at in this book. And it rings very true to me. One of the things Malcolm X said was that he was giving a speech, and he was talking about stop saying that this happens to you in the South, or stop saying that this is something that's going on in the South. As long as you underneath the Canadian border, you in the South. He was like, so basically saying that all of these, it didn't matter where you was at, that these issues were still very relevant. And at the time that I had heard him say that in the speech, it just seemed like a real good line, but later on I would go on to read, books like this book and books like some of the other books we're going to read this week for the Racial Injustice Week. And it reminded me that, that is very true, that I think in there they talked about Montana and how the black population of Montana decreased heavily from domestic terrorist attacks. It talks about, a lot of speaks about California a lot in there, and Oakland and San Francisco, and how some of those places ended up being in the manner that they are. They speak about Chicago and Cleveland heavily, Midwestern cities. I think that that was the thing that struck me the most, is that these systems that were set in place in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s have stayed all the way until present day now, where you can go to Chicago and you can see how segregated Chicago is. And, it's not like it was a default type thing. I think that was one of the things I used to think when I was younger too, is that, black people just, live with black people and congregated with black people and communed with black people because, they were black, and white people because they were white, or Italians, and so on and so forth. And the truth of the matter is, a lot of times they didn't have any option, to be in these neighborhoods, except for to be in these communities. And so for me, that was one of the things that was very striking, just how recent all of these things are, how they're still very much still set in place, and how it didn't matter what city or what state you were in, there was equal opportunity for racism and bigotry around these issues.
I think that is important. That's something I wanted to bring up next. That this AI talked about things in Austin, Texas, but it also talked about Sugar Hill, and it talked about things in Trenton, New Jersey, and Camden, New Jersey, and Cicero, which is right outside Chicago. So I do think that is important. That too often it does get portrayed like, oh, things are so much better across the Mason-Dixie line, but it's in reality it's just But things often are portrayed as if they're better above the Mason-Dixie line. Mason-Dixon? Okay. Yeah, Mason-Dixon line. But really it's not really that much better, and maybe just the tactics may change, and even some cases, the same things that happened to you in some small Texas town can happen to you in Wisconsin or in Illinois, and so it's not an issue just in the South. It's an issue nationally, and even I think you would even say globally. Do you have any thoughts on that? Just have it's more of a national problem, not just a Southern problem. Yes.
No.
So I think that's something that I've been very adamant about trying to tie back into a lot of the stories that we've been hearing about, is the fact that these actions, this racism, this oppression, the policies, the attitudes towards people of color. That's not just something that you'll find in the South. It's not something that you'll find just in, bigger cities. A lot of this story is talking about, or was it yesterday? Yesterday I was talking about San Francisco a lot, in California a lot. And this one or yesterday? Yesterday, right? This one? I was talking about that. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, it's already started. No, I don't think so. Yeah, so it's 2 days ago. It's 2 days. You know what? It doesn't matter.
That's what it's feels for. I don't remember the day. That's why it's
But I've been trying to do. I've been trying to do my best to tie the stories and the events into things that we would see locally, so people aren't just thinking that it's something that you would find in the South, or people aren't just thinking that it was something that you would find, in a little town in Texas or in bigger cities. I've been trying to tie it specifically a lot here to Rockford and kind of tell stories not just about my personal experience, but the experience of, comrades from not just the last year, but things that I've heard people have to experience throughout our lives. Because this wasn't just, an issue that we started to become oppressed once we started protesting, once we started standing up to oppression. I mean, it became more, it came down heavier. It felt like a lot of us were targeted specifically because of the noise that we were making, because of the voices that we were raising. But for people of color, or for black people specifically, this has been an issue for, all of our lives. And while I understand that I have the privilege of being white passing and that it hasn't been as difficult for me, on paper, I'm still a black woman. So, that's all that some people are ever going to see. If it never gets to the point where people meet me in person, or if I put in for an application, or I do this or I do that, on paper, I'm going to get treated the same way that anyone else would. And so, I think that it's important to fill people in on experiences from real people that are in our lives, people that have spoken to us about situations they've been through, people that we've been connected with throughout, the last almost year now, and tell their stories, tell our stories, and let people know, I grew up in Rockford. I was born in Rockford. I lived in Rockford all the way up until adulthood, and, this was a lot of this stuff, my perception of it is new, but I knew the events were not necessarily new. The events were something that had been happening all my life, but it wasn't until I started becoming educated that my perception of it changed, and I realized the magnitude of these situations. So I think that it's important for everybody to understand that these are people that have really been through these situations here in Rockford. It's not just an issue in the South. It's not just an issue from decades ago, from back in the 50s or whatever, how they would treat people. It's not just an issue, in big cities where they have a larger police force, or, more expendable money to use on additional equipment and, things to terrorize the city. I think that it's important for people to understand that this is a reality for the people that are right here in this community.
It talked heavily about housing, and that made me I was. We had talked about this early in the morning, but I was around I was 14 when the Down Sterling thing happened, so I didn't really. I remember hearing about it, and it was almost like a joke. It was almost like not like a joke, but like yeah. So when when the ESPN did that podcast series about it, I tuned in. I listened to every episode, but I was at a point to where I am now, to where I would be able to understand things better. I had to have more empathy and more awareness of what the things that he actually had done in regards to housing. I remember there was one incident where we had talked about this before, early in the morning, where his wife, I believe his name is Shelly. I believe it's Shelly. I believe it's Shelly or Shirley, something. I think Shelly. I'm gonna go with Shelly. But they had talked about how they only liked certain amount of, not only liked a certain amount, but they only liked certain people, a certain race, to hold, to be I don't know what would you say, to be a tenant in their apartments, and that didn't have to do anything about, like, the thing that surprised me with that is it wasn't white people. I think it was. I think they said Korean people. I think it was Korean people, and their reasoning was that it didn't matter to them. It didn't matter the conditions that the apartments were in. That they felt as if Korean people would just be thankful for it no matter what, and they would just be able to put up with it no matter what. And they had talked about how if a black family moved in, that how they would have to jump through all these hoops and go through, and Shelly would go in and pretend like she's some type of inspector and find ways to kick them out and find ways to evict them. So I really, as I talk more about housing, it made me think. Often I'm really big into, not really big. I like sports. So when some of these situations gets brought up, it's easier for me to relay that to something that I heard in the sports world of things. But again, we talked about this earlier, and this is something that I was too young. I was way too young for this, but I wasn't way too young. But the Newtown, is that what it's called, Newtown?
Oh,
Newtown. I remember my mother talking about it, and I remember it wasn't something, like, I was young, so it never really got like in depth or nothing like that. I just remember her bringing it up, but through Terry, and Terry's been a source of a lot of this more learning and understanding for things, especially with things that have happened here. He talked about how many people were against this and how they held racist gatherings. So it made me think of things that have happened here, but also made me think that is that a thing? The more you know, the less you know. It made me realize that. That was what I was thinking about really heavily, especially after reading this last couple chapters. That there is a lot more things that I have to learn. There's a lot more things that I am eager to learn and eager to look up and eager to find out. Do you have any knowledge about that, the Newtown thing? Do you have any type of knowledge?
No, I don't.
No, you don't?
I think that's also been one of the things that I haven't been able to. One of the things that I haven't been able to consciously do, that I hope maybe tonight or tomorrow, or I don't know, once we start getting in a more of a groove here, or getting deeper into a groove here. One of the things that I do want to do is go back through some of these books chapter by chapter and figure out which things that are being covered in some of the chapters of these books that we can try to look deeper into here in Rockford. I don't know very much about Newtown. I'll be interested to find out more, but I would also then be interested to find out more about I can't remember the name of the housing project, but it was a very big thing when it happened. But there has been housing projects here that have been destroyed, and then the families relocated to put to different places. It doesn't get it. I don't know how deep it gets into it in this book, The Color of Law. It was another book that I was tempted to get to incorporate into this called High Rises, which is coincidentally about the destruction of Cabrini Green and the destruction of projects and sort of like the failure of the housing projects. But I wanted to I thought it was good that we try to hit as many different aspects of some of these things as possible, and I felt The Color of Law sort of already touched on the housing issue. However, that is also a thing that maybe, I don't know how deep it'll get into it in this, but the displacement of families and homes and poor people and black people who have lived in some of these housing projects that have been destroyed and then have the areas have been used for gentrification. I think that's one of the things that stood out to me a lot too, is the cycle of things in some of these places, and how the black people and the poor people would sometimes just be in place of the cycle. To me, this was the first time where I read this and I fully understood gentrification in the full aspects of it. I think reading how you would have, let's say, City A, and City A has, how these housing projects that the government is is assisting with, and it's medium income families living there, and say it's 1920, and then you say like 10 years 20 years pass or whatever, and now they build a separate things of housing projects, and they're starting to build suburbs, and white people get to go into the separate thing of housing projects, and then the black people stay in the old original housing projects, and then they pull out all the resources and stop maintaining and keeping up with those housing projects, and so those housing projects start to decline in value. They won't allow black people to live into the new suburbs or the new housing projects that they're building. So now those black people have to be stuffed into the area where they can live at, in the housing projects that now are becoming slums and ghettos because the maintenance is being pulled out. And so the value of all the things in that area is completely plummeting. Meanwhile, the value for all the places that the white people are now moving to is going up, because they're taking better care of it, and it's new, and it's no black people living there, so the people who decide the value for the property is making the value go higher. And then you get to a place where, as you get deeper into like the 50s, 60s, 70s in some of these areas, and depending on the spot, it might be 80s, 90s, 2000s or whatever, but now this area that consciously was deprived of resources and consciously was turned into a slum, into a ghetto, now these people go back and they start purchasing property in that area, or displacing people who live in the area, displacing projects and destroying projects, and removing those people and putting those people into other places, so that way they can now go back and gentrify that neighborhood and make that neighborhood worth more money, and now start taking care of that neighborhood again and start making that neighborhood better. And then they spoke about like block busting and white flight, and so when these people do get pulled out of this negative neighborhood and you do displace them and put them in other areas, and maybe you put them like how Newtown is, where it's next to where affluent, not really necessarily affluent white people, but more white middle class lives at, and now these white people in the middle class start to flee from that area and go to somewhere different, probably suburbs that are now newly being built, and then the cycle starts over again, because as they flee from the area, the prices depreciate from that area, so now people who have more money don't want to live there, which means it's more likely that poor people and black people will live there. And now you go through the cycle again, where a new area of town will become a ghetto or become a slum, and resources will be deprived from it. And so reading and actually seeing that happen and take place in city after city gave me a very different understanding to the word gentrification and to block busting and to white flight. I think to me the best thing that book does is it continues to do that cycle. It continues to show you the cycle of black people moving in, white people moving out, black people moving in, white people not wanting them to live there, black people moving in, the neighborhood dropping in value, black people moving in, but in reality it increases, because when somebody goes back and buys it again, and then I think for me the second thing in that is the crime aspect that this book doesn't really touch on or get into too deeply, but as all of these things were happening, crime in America was changing drastically. Prohibition was happening in the 20s and the 30s, which In the book we just read, maybe 2 days ago, Rise of the Police, Rise of the Warrior Cop, they talked about how when Prohibition happened, violence went up and crime went up because now a black market was created. And even though we haven't really read it, we haven't found it, I've gotten to a place where I can sort of start understanding and assuming things, and I can almost assume that and believe that black people played a heavier price for Prohibition than white people played. In the end of policing, they spoke about how certain crimes were shifted to be in certain neighborhoods. They talked about how like they would sex work, red light districts, how certain neighborhoods they would allow, sex working to take place. Anybody who understands drug dealing to a certain extent or to a certain level, even though movies are fictionalized, but you can watch a movie about the 80s or listen to a Vlad TV interview with somebody from the 80s and they tell you like it was easy to sell crack. It's a line around the corner of people, coming and buying crack and selling crack and heroin the same way where, even now, people know what areas of the city you can go to get drugs at, and what areas of the city you probably are going to have a hard time getting drugs at. And so all of these things, in my opinion, it just continues to broaden the view and a deeper understanding of how you can do pretext stops, how it's easy to make sure that black people get caught up in the system when you went out of your way to make sure that certain neighborhoods and areas are, predominantly black and certain ones are predominantly white.
Oh, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a good night.
Thank you. Cabrini Green demolished in 2011. So
2011. I will say with that, yes, there are. I believe that thought process is out there that there are certain areas that you can go to get drugs, but there are also, I talked about in one of the books about outdoor markets, but also indoor markets. So where, yes, maybe more openly done or has to be more openly done, but there are also areas in the, more affluent areas where would be indoor areas. This little section that got me a little bit angry. Not like angry, but it got me
Visibly upset.
And yes. No, I wouldn't say that either. But but it was this section that just made me, at the time I was angry with what he was saying. I'll say that I was really like, why are you saying that? But then after I read the full little section, I stopped too early. I realized that was this problem. I stopped too early. But this was a section when the police officer has killed or beaten an African American man with apparent racial motivation, we now expect that the officer's superiors will fire him or her. So I just read that, and that's where I stopped. And then I went into the whole thing of, I don't expect anybody to get fired, If anything, I wouldn't be surprised if McNeese gets promoted in a couple of years. I wouldn't be surprised if these cops that shoot somebody or the other officers that beat up Denzel like that, I wouldn't be surprised if they all got promotions in a couple of years. I don't expect any of the cops in Rockford to get reprimanded at all. I don't expect any of them to miss days of work or to be suspended without pay. There's been 50 cases since 90. All of them have been ruled justified. Some people shot somebody, they were off for 3 days, went right back to work. So I don't, the culture, there's something that Terry says pretty heavily. Yeah, it's been, there's a culture of impunity. There are, I would say they're almost encouraged to make people's faces like that. They're almost encouraged to enact out their violence. And when it gets done, there's community outrage, there's public outrage, but inside the police department, there's no remorse or regret or anything like that. There's almost a good job. I would almost suspect that I wish it could have been me that did it too. I wish I could have been there. I wish I could have gotten in some punches on Denzel. I wish I could have made him face look like that as well. But then it went on to say, but then I thought about, and I didn't say this before, but his name, I just looked this up because I didn't want to be wrong. But Jason Bailey, he was a cop. He shot somebody in 2000, right? He shot somebody in 2000. Like the cases before him and the cases since then, justified. Everything. The person ended up surviving. I believe he shot him in the leg. I believe, but the person ended up surviving. Didn't get fired. Was off work for a little bit with pay. Everything went back to normal. A couple years go down. They find over 100. What was that? I forget the exact number, but the number is an incredibly high number of adult websites on his computer, and that's what got him fired. And quickly, he got a job in the Park District. He's a Park District cop now. So this idea that cops here are gonna be reprimanded or face some type of punishment at all for any of their actions of violence is a false one. It's a not true, untrue narrative. But it did go on to say, which I liked. I don't know if I would say liked. Or, if there is doubt about whether a citizen's civil rights were violated, we'll suspend the officer pending an investigation. If superiors fail to take such measures, we expect still higher authorities to intervene. If they do not, we can reasonably assume that the police officer's approach fit within the bounds of what his or hers superiors consider appropriate response and reflect governmental policy. So that made me think about Carla Red and her saying, "Oh well, kicking, hitting, punching, that's all well within policy." And these officers who have been promoted already. Carla Red shot somebody. She's assistant deputy chief. Kurt is the deputy chief. He killed one person, shot at another woman at the same incident. Randy Burke shot somebody. Who's District 2? Givens. Givens was I think so. No, Burke is 2. Givens is 1. Givens was a trainings officer. Mike Dalkey had lawsuits up against him. You know, all these cops these cops that are in charge, they're not good citizens with a clean record, and they've never done something wrong in their entire police record. These are people who have shot somebody, who have probably made people's faces look like Denzel's. These aren't the goody two shoes cop or whatever. These are cops that have enacted violence, that have negatively affected community members, that have. I just keep looking at. Damn, that's all I keep looking about. What? Oh, damn. But just the culture of impunity, and it did like that. How he did say that he almost chronicled. Damn it! He almost talked about what should happen if the system worked how we thought it should. That if a cop shot somebody, they should get fired. They should face some type of prosecution. They should face some type of criminal penalty. But the reality is they don't. They just get promoted in a couple of years. So I guess I would pose that question to you: is, damn, never mind. So we're gonna wrap this book up. Pretty soon. 2 chapters. We're gonna finish it today. Yes. We're gonna finish it before midnight. Well rested. Okay. Yes. Oh, it's sticky right here. What happened right here? It's sticky. Okay. I'll toss this to you. We gonna highlight you. You gotta take it easy. Damn, that's crazy. Pay it forward. This chapter is called Looking Forward and Looking Back. Looking back and looking forward. I think so. Looking forward and looking back. Okay. So. Okay. When I was thinking about this, the biggest book I was able to think back of was End of Policing. We just talked about how people would be better off if they had permanent housing. It made me think about that really heavily. How a lot of these families They get, and also what I was reading about, it made me think of that, and it has been almost like a theme of the last couple of books that we have, right? Is that these actions have all been purposeful. Like they meant to, when they built the highways, they meant to tear up these black communities. They meant to destroy these and displace these families. They had no type of care. It talked about how they had laid out the plans and published the plans, and it had negatively affected the white community. So the white community went forward and they protested it, brought up all their issues with it. They said, okay, they changed it. And they changed it to a black community. It would run through a black community displaced, a whole bunch of families, same type of thing. People protested, objected to it, and it was just, their concerns were just dismissed and then swept under the rug, and they did it anyway.
Rap, did you read about like plants? They're talking about like chemical plants and like trash plants, I think, and how trying to put them in like black neighborhoods, trying to put them in certain neighborhoods. And,
Industrial. Yeah. How they'd have dumps right there, and how they'd. I think that was another section like that where I read where there was a dump that was going to get made, and the community, which is heavily African American, it already had a dump next to it, and they were going to make a new one, and there was a question about where to put it, and there was almost no question about where they were going to put it. What do you think about the purposeful actions to destroy and negatively affect these communities that were made? How it's not like how we were talking about earlier, that these weren't mistakes. These were actions made with intent. These are intentional actions. These were they knew what they were going to do to families. They knew how this was going to impact people's lives, and they did it anyway and did nothing for them. And they did nothing for them after that. They did nothing for them to help them find homes or anything like that. Almost should be the opposite way.
Right. So I think I kind of talked about this a little bit earlier with you, Leslie, when I was talking about all of the actions that they were taking were intentional, and that every time there was some sort of pushback saying they were violating somebody's constitutional or civil rights, they would find these loopholes to ensure they can continue discriminating, with housing, that they can continue segregation, that they can hold off as long as they possibly could integration. There we go. Tongue-tied. All right. The integration of neighborhoods and schools. And so the way, that I was looking at it, we had talked about like the war on drugs and that coming up. And I know that was a conversation between you guys as well. But my view on it was that it was going to happen regardless, and that the whole the whole war on drugs began because they were losing their fight. If you look at the kind of the years are matching up as they're losing this fight to integrate, people into these suburban subsidized homes and these areas that they wanted to be all white or predominantly white, that they then began blockbusting and filling with African American families. Eventually it got to the point where they kind of realized that they set this precedent that you're not supposed to be discriminating against people based on race. But then it was like, how can we get around that and be able to continue discriminating against people based on race? And so to try and backtrack and remove these people from these suburban, all white neighborhoods, they began this campaign to mass incarcerate people of color. And so I felt like that was going to happen regardless of, if they really had, if from the beginning when they said, okay, we're going to desegregate everything, and everything is fair. You can buy houses wherever you want to buy houses, and there wasn't this whole long decades long battle between the courts and the people and neighborhoods and banks and the FHA and everything, that they were going to look for ways to be able to discriminate and keep people legal loopholes to keep people out of these communities. So I think everything was very intentional. I think that it was on purpose because they were trying to keep that from happening. And it wasn't just a government or like a few businesses here and there. It was almost like an entire society. A majority would stand up and really be going along with this. People would sign private contracts saying that they wouldn't sell their homes to a black person when they eventually moved out. And everybody who lived in the neighborhood, in these all-white neighborhoods, before they bought a house, were required to sign these contracts saying that they wouldn't sell to a white person. And so, I think everything was very meticulous. Everything was very methodical. How they wrote policy and how they changed laws, or how they challenged laws, or how they passed laws to leave out wording, or to be very vague, or to create these loopholes. When in the end, the Constitution never changed, and their opinion about housing discrimination based on your constitutional and civil rights changed though over time, even though the Constitution never changed. The Constitution from day one, you're not supposed to discriminate based on race, but people are still being discriminated against. So I think that it was very intentional, very purposeful what they were doing to ensure that they could still have this segregated society the way that they wanted, and not let laws and legalities get in the way of having these all-white neighborhoods and being able to live without black people around.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about Sugar Hill. That was something, I only knew Rappers Delight. I didn't really know. I didn't really know anything about actual Sugar Hill, so that was an interesting read. But I was trying to look and find which city it was, and I can't find it like this. But it talked about how there was this long battle. How about there was a Ford plan, and how they were trying to get these towns made.
So they would have to drive so far.
So yeah, they had to drive like I forget how many miles they said it was.
2-3 hours.
Yes. Yep. Well, yeah, I talked about, and it's real slanted right now. And I talked about how it was this long battle, and it was long trying to get into integrated cities, and there was a fight in the Buchanan. I forget his first. I think so. Yeah. They were against it. They were doing everything they could to stop it, and do everything they could to stop these integrated buildings to be built, and there was just this whole long drawn out process. So I had really talked about that and laid it out really well. But at the end, I talked about how they had won in a sense.
Yeah, but it was too late, right?
They had won in a sense. Yep, it had been so many. I think a year and a couple of months or something like that, where most of the white people they were fine. They already had their homes in the air, and everything was good for them. So the African American people they were defeated. They felt defeated by this time. That made me think that and we've talked about this before. Through our conversations that what Tommy said, that you shouldn't celebrate just getting some points on the board. That made me think about just how long the struggle is, and how it is a marathon, and how it the small victories. I don't. The small victories. I think it's sometimes good to note them for like morale purposes and things like that. But it's a marathon. There's still so much work to be done. If that had gotten done, if that had only taken a couple months instead of the year and however many it took, that's a totally different outlook. That's a totally different opinion and totally different thing. That would be a slightly bigger win, but it's still not worth. You don't celebrate. You shouldn't celebrate for getting some points on the board when you're down by so much. That's been through this and through reading these books and through this entire time. Ever since he said that to me, it's been one of the main thoughts that I've been thinking about ever since then. But I am excited to read these final 2 chapters, or to hear these final 2 chapters in the epilogue. But you have already read them. You already read this book. So, what were your takeaways from that? The
entire book or
the entire book? The entire book.
At the time I read this. The next book I read, I think immediately after, or I was reading in conjunction, or around the same time, was The End of Policing. And I think for me, this answered the questions of how is it a systemic problem, or how is it a generational problem, or why is crime in neighborhoods the way that they are, or why have certain neighborhoods, and why have it's the saying that Dr. King has. Well, first, to the thing that you said about the housing, one of the main quote that I get when I go through and read this book is justice too long denied is justice. How is it?
Justice delayed is justice
denied. Yeah, justice too long delayed is justice denied.
I got that.
Yeah. Jay Hanley. Uche. I think one of the things that I get a lot through this book is, delayed justice. A lot of one of the things. Okay, I'll wrap it up. But one of the things that is said, somebody said that, speaking about integration and speaking about school integration and public housing integration, they said that it was something that they would win the court cases, but the court cases would go all the way to the Supreme Court for them to win, and that basically meant that when somebody would be discriminated in that manner again, that you would have to get a lawyer and then go all the way up to the Supreme Court case again. It wouldn't be like, you go to the Supreme Court, they rule that you can't discriminate in housing, so you have to have integrated housing. And now when the next person comes to build a building, it's set, in stone that they have to have integrated housing. No, the next person comes to build a building, and if somebody doesn't object and get a lawyer and go all the way to the Supreme Court with it again, they'll just have the segregated housing. And so the things that were implemented a lot of times in these books were things that cannot be duplicated. You could get justice for Ari, but Ari getting justice did not mean that Leslie got justice. And you could get justice for Leslie, but Leslie getting justice didn't mean Larissa got justice. And no, I got tricked. Yeah, we can edit it. We edit point. Anyway. Yeah. Anyways. Damn. Damn. Yeah.
How about we edit out all of you guys sleeping? How about we edit that?
Damn, we taking shots. What if people didn't even know that happened? This is a different demographic. It's a different time. They didn't even see that video. They don't know. Different people watching at this time. See, these people don't know. See, look, somebody just liked it. They don't know. They didn't know about that. You just told them. Now they're going to try to go find the video. So that was, to me, that was one of the things, is that this type of justice did not bring justice for other people, and that's very true to where we're at now. Derek Chauvin could go to jail for murder 2 or murder 3 or manslaughter, but the people who killed, no, I don't think so. Actually, I'm starting to think they might give him what's Laquan McDonald? I think they're gonna do the Laquan McDonald thing where they guilty, small amount of time in prison. Yeah. But that doesn't, Breonna Taylor's killer still went free. Jacob Blake's attempted killer still went free. Haven't heard much about the Ahmaud Arbery trial, or the trial for the people who killed Ahmaud Arbery. But so I think that was another thing that stood out to me, is that, too many times we get isolated justice and it's late isolated justice, and it's not collective on time justice. But also, I think I left this book with the idea that, and I think the book that we're going to read, these next 2 books, will really help with that too. But the idea that some of these things are outside of individuals' strength to overcome. When you read about how they pushed, they stuffed people into these neighborhoods and deprived resources from the neighborhoods. And when you know that these people also lacked employment, it's, it doesn't talk about employment or education a lot in there. It touches on it a little bit here and there. But these same people, it was hard for them to find jobs. It was hard for them to find houses. It was hard for them to find jobs, hard for them to find schools where they could get good education at. And then that carries over to the next generation, and then that carries on over to the generation after that. And then also, we don't in the midst of here, you don't really see it, but there's wars going on. So even the people that are coming back, these are like traumatized people. World War I ends in this book, and people come looking for housing. World War II ends in this book, people come back looking for housing. Vietnam War goes on in the midst of this book. Korean War goes on in the midst of this book. And I think that the week we had last week was a lot about police terrorism and mass incarceration, and about how those issues look. And those are causes, you know what I'm saying? And now we're getting into this week, and a lot of it is the root issues. And I think for me, this was the first book that let me really understand deeper the root issues of inner city violence and community violence and community drug addiction and things like that. And so for these tomorrow we're reading Caste, and then the day after that is a Peculiar Indifference. And I think those 3 books are going to tie very closely together within each other.
You're going off how it takes more than the individual. What we had talked about. I think we talked about this earlier this morning about how, until we reckon, there's a section in which she talked about how it takes the community to change. It takes a community to have a culture change. It takes a community to uplift each other into. Hello. It takes a community to come into these situations and to change and to demand these things and to demand better policies and demand these things. But at first it takes that culture change. At first it takes people coming to situations where they are more empathetic. They do have more awareness and do have more understanding about certain situations. So this is, I think, going along that this is kind of the point of this. This is kind of the point of what we're doing out here. Kind of the point of what one of the reasons that we have stayed out here for so long is to bring along that culture, bring along that culture change, bring along that awareness, bring along that understanding, and to display and to show empathy and to be able to hopefully be able to put that into others, put that into gain more community understanding, community awareness, and community empathy and things like that. So we are gonna wrap this up. The Color of Law, Day 8, Book 8. Two more chapters left. We're gonna finish this up. Tomorrow's cast. Tomorrow is cast. Okay. Then last minute group discussions around 5-ish. Fluid though. Yes. Fluid. Real fluid. But breakfast Saturday and Sunday and Friday. Yes. No matter the conditions, that we will still be out here, and breakfast will still be available on the weekends, and pizza Friday night. Pizza Friday night.
Yeah, we were told the individual servings of the breakfast from now on. It's all going to be prepackaged.
Okay, breakfast Saturday and Sunday, pizza, and yeah, pizza. Friday nights, group discussion, 5 p.m., 5-ish.
We gonna end it.
End it.